this truck right here is the Shift Points 1955. Yes, I promise it's a 55 first series Chevrolet truck. Now, I thought it would be cool to kind of do some standalone videos for each one of the cars that we've worked on here in the past 2 years on Shift Points. For some of the people who might be new to the channel, maybe have only seen our videos on the 55 or the Galaxy or something like that, this truck right here, this is what started it all. This truck was actually a customer truck to begin with. It came in here. It was a pretty big project the guy had kind of wanted to get into. Well, decided he wanted to put an LS, 9-inch, a few things like that into this truck. And this truck was found over in Gray, Tennessee. It was hanging in pieces in a guy's barn. He had disassembled it and done this paint job to it. And then basically they just ended up hung up in the barn, ready for someone to come find them. So the original owner, Jeff Kaplan, got in touch with Dad, started working on the truck, went and got it out of Gray, brought it here in pieces, and then that's when the real work started. So one of the first things that happened to this truck was the original straight axle was pulled out of it and a Heights independent front suspension was put into it. Those suspensions have, of course, coil springs, they've got sway bars. They're really great kits, and Dad has installed quite a few of them over the years, one of them being in this truck here. We've had super good luck out of these kits on all of those different projects. So he takes all their measurements, does, how anal Dad is about stuff anyway. And so he gets his measurements dead on to what they call for anywhere in that book whenever he's doing one of these kits, and then goes ahead and installs that front suspension. So that was one of the very first steps on that. That is a Mustang 2 style front suspension, and it's really, they handle great. They got really good response. They got a rack and pinion. It's just a nice set, really nice setup, and has worked super well on this truck here. So after the front suspension, one of the biggest things that we did is we put this LS motor in it. This motor is a Gen 4 LS. It's out of a 2009 Chevrolet truck. But this engine's basically bone stock. So there's been a few things deleted off of it and stuff like that. The wiring kit that we used came from PSI. Really good kit because everything laid out really well. We told them everything we were doing with it, what we were getting rid of, what we weren't getting rid of, and they built us that wiring harness, and everything really laid really neatly in the valleys and everywhere else, and got everything plugged in. So we're really happy with that as far as the wiring harness itself went. So that's the engine harness. Along with the engine harness, a Ron Francis chassis wiring harness. We've used those on a few different projects as well. So we'll get under here. So here is what our wiring distribution block is, our fuse panel. This is the express panel. You can see they're laid out really well. Everything is numbered. Just works out really well. This is one of the first this is basically the first one that I basically wired myself. This was where the truck was at that point. That we started working on this truck again after it had set for a while after Dad bought it. We were at that point where it was basically time to start the wiring process. And so that was kind of something that I just jumped in on and kind of figured out. There's things I learned through this that probably I would have done a little different on this truck. But in general, it's worked really well. Maybe that speaks to how good the system is, probably not how good of a wiring job that I did. But anyway, we've basically had no flaws. The only thing whenever we did this initially was I had put the bulbs in for the tail lights backwards. Parking lights were brighter than the brake lights, and so I just had the bulb turned the wrong direction. So power was on the wrong side of the bulb. Got all that straightened out, but that was honestly the biggest issue that we had with the wiring on this thing. So I guess a pat on the back for me. A little bit, I guess. But so the other thing that this PSI wiring harness came with was, it didn't come with it. So it came with this fuse panel here, and we set off the truck and transmission controller units to PSI when they reprogrammed them, and then they sent them back to us along with this fuse panel. So this fuse panel here is all integrated into that PSI system. So all fuses for the wiring harness and things like that. So we do have the electronic throttle pedal in here also, come basically out of a Silverado. That's all mounted up and bolted up and integrated into that harness also. So really there's a lot of stuff that was kind of crammed into this truck. And if you guys know anything about these 50 models, late 40s model Chevrolet trucks, there's not a ton of room. And there's more room in these trucks compared to like a late 40s truck by a pretty good margin, I would say. And even then, you can see this thing is really crammed in here. So this is a 5.3 motor, has a 4L60 transmission behind it. Like I said, it is basically a bone stock. We haven't done any, we didn't even put a cam in it or anything like that. One future thing we would love to do to this truck is put a nice Brian Tooley cam in it, kind of spruce it up a little. I think that would make a big difference, but you know, maybe one day. Another part of this truck that was brought to us by the customer was a full stainless Borla exhaust kit. So Borla is, they have a plant just over in Irwin, Tennessee, and so they're kind of local to us. Dad built that entire exhaust system from the headers, or from the manifolds back. He didn't build the manifolds, of course, they're hooker manifolds, and then come off of that with that exhaust system. He built that entire system all the way back to the mufflers, and it dumps down just in front of the rear axle housing. But one of the other kind of funny things about this deal was we decided, again, we were getting really close to Power Tour. We kept almost being done, almost being done, almost being done, and he calls me and he says, "Hey, order us an H-pipe kit for this thing." And I was like, what? We can't put an H-pipe on it right now. We got to get ready for Power Tour, blah, blah, blah. He said, get us an H-pipe kit. So we got an H-pipe and we put that kit in. I think that kit came from Jegs, actually. So we put that H-pipe in and it made it sound better. It made it, it actually deadened the sound in the cab substantially. So this thing had a drone like crazy the first few times that we drove it. And then after that, we put the H-pipe in. It completely changed the truck. Even with the Dynamat in it, it made a huge difference. So it's actually an ear saver on us that we put that H-pipe in. But there is some performance to an H-pipe, at least so they say. And in general, this truck, it sounds pretty darn good. If you go back and watch all the build videos on this, there was a point for like almost a month that we got stuck on trying to perfect all the fittings and the cooling system on this truck, and not the engine itself, but getting everything to fit. So getting this aluminum radiator to fit in place. There are spacers that have this spaced as far forward as we can get it so that we could get more clearance on the electric fan to the front of the engine. Then there was the cooling system itself. As everyone knows, the LS engines have these really great cooling systems. They run at 210 all the time. It doesn't matter if it's 100 degrees outside or if it's 10 degrees outside. They maintain that and they work really well. Well, we wanted to make sure that we kept that, because the last thing we wanted was to basically downgrade something that already worked so well. And so we had to work really hard to make that happen. Luckily, I stumbled on a company called Autoplum, and they made these super cool fittings that really at the end of the day made making this cooling system work like it does possible. So these Autoplum fittings are basically an adapter, and they adapt from a radiator fitting to a -20 AN fitting. So basically there is a clamp and some adhesive in here that all works together. There's a whole process that you do to put these on, but you let them sit, everything seals up. We've never had a leak out of these. Now, this fitting here, and then it goes in, this is a full flow -20 fitting into this -20 hose that goes into the top of the water pump, and then there's also the same ones down here on the bottom. Dad actually moved the outlet from the radiator on this side over to that side so that we could get from the thermostat housing over to that side and actually have some actual length of hose in there. And this thing has worked flawlessly. We've never had an issue with the cooling system. This truck has always cooled really well, even with that relatively small radiator. It's worked really good. The aluminum radiator is great. Now on Power Tour, we were started to realize that, oh man, our transmission's getting a lot warmer than we want it to. And the transmission cooler is built into that radiator, and you can imagine is relatively small. And the way that this transmission's tucked up under the truck, it doesn't get a ton of airflow. We believe if you run an automatic transmission that you should run a transmission cooler anyway. But again, we kind of ran out of time, so it was time to go ahead and add one once we got back. Dad told me when he got home, because this is what he does. He said, I want the biggest transmission cooler we can find to fit on that truck. So I said, okay. So the transmission cooler that I found was called a True Cool Max. And all the research that I did, they said this is by far the best transmission cooler that you can get to run in one of these 4L60 transmissions. So we ended up mounting it up in front of the radiator, and that made a huge difference in our transmission temps, and basically I think at the end of the day saved that transmission from straining itself, and you know, we're gonna see how it continues to go as we keep driving this truck, but so far very good. So the interior in this thing, I always laugh that this truck is basically as shift points and as me and Dad as it gets. You can see here the paint is in fine shape. It's fine. Somebody did some, like I said, whoever put this paint on this truck, it's not the original paint. I think it was probably close to the original color, but it's chipping in places. You can see where we've taken spray paint and kind of done some spots here and there, but basically this thing is pretty, I won't say rudimentary, but it's like extremely functional, but there's not a lot of flair, I guess is the right word I'm looking for. But if we get in here, one thing we did splurge on was this absolutely killer set of gauges from Classic Instruments. These install into the stock positions. They have turn signals built into them. They have, this one came with a tack. We bought one with a tack. The tack's pretty small, so it's not super functional for us in general, but it's still a nice thing to have. You can see you get oil pressure, fuel gauge, temperature, and your voltage meter over here as well. One kind of interesting thing about this truck is these are actually flipped. So in a stock truck, these would have been over here. I can't remember what all was in this gauge here, but basically this set of gauges would have been on this side and the speedometer over here. But I would love to say I did it on purpose. But to be honest with you, I did it like this because when I put them in, when I installed them, I decided that, well, when I put them in, I thought, well, speedometer on the left. There's so many of your cars now, which most of them's in the middle, but a lot of them have the speedometer on the left-hand side, and then everything else is kind of on the right-hand side. So in my head, that was just how they should go. So I went ahead and got them bolted in and started doing the wiring and stuff. And at that point, I realized after looking at some of these trucks, the stock gauges in them, they had them backwards. But still, I like this a lot better. You know, not to try and take up for myself, but I like this setup better. So, but it's just one of those little quirky things that was kind of an accident. But at the end of the day, I kind of liked how it turned out. Was having this speedometer here on the left-hand side. Dad was able to make the stock emergency brake pedal function. So when you press this emergency brake pedal like this, that is setting the emergency brakes on the 9-inch back there, and then you could pull this lever here and that disconnects it. So basically all of that's integrated into our modern 9-inch stuff. We have our headlight dimmer switch here on the floor also, and you can see we have not done any interior work to this, but we ended up taking this truck on a power tour in 2023. And one thing that we did to the interior before we left is Dynamat makes some like 1-inch foam. We put that here in the headliner, under the headliner, and then we put the Dynamat itself on the floor, across the entire floor. And you talk about saving our lives a few days there in Charlotte when it was so hot. This thing you would think would be an oven, but man, that Dynamat stuff works so good. We've been so lucky with it. I ended up putting it in my Galaxy the same way just because I knew how good that it worked because of this truck. But like I said, pretty bare bones. Maybe one day we'll throw some carpet or something in here. But the big thing was that we didn't want to mess with, and because we were trying to get ready for Power Tour, is Dad built this transmission tunnel here, and so it changed and to make it fit the 4L60 because he wanted to get that further back than what it was. So you can actually see he has recessed the firewall here. You can see kind of that shape that's in the firewall. He built this transmission tunnel. It is bolted in, so we can actually undo that and pull this tunnel out if we ever needed to do anything with it. So a lot of work was done to this truck before we ever got started on it on the channel itself. He ended up putting floor pans in this truck. They were one of the more rotted parts of this truck. Body wise, everything else on this truck was really good, but the floors needed some attention, so he ended up putting floor pans in it. But like I said, everything else super solid. Now continuing on with the interior, you can see when we got a lot closer to power tour, things got a little more critical. We needed the OBD2 port. That's just held in with some self tappers here. We still haven't actually changed that almost 2 years later. This is a switch for the heater. This right here is if with our disc brake system, that is our brake light switch. So if anything fails, if there's a failure, there's a valve that will shuttle forward or backwards in that system, and it'll light this light up to let us know that we have either rear or front brakes have failed, and it basically tells you, hey, get somewhere. I added this amber light in here. That is our check engine light, so that is fully functional. We know if there's a check engine light or anything like that on this engine. And this right here is a very functional cigarette lighter, and it's it's actually mocked up like the original one that's in here. And we also have the ashtray for all that smoking that we do in here. One thing we get questioned about all the time in this truck is the seat back. So this seat back has very little padding in it. It's basically just maybe about a ½ inch of kind of soft foam. And the reason why is the original seat back in this truck was 7 inches deep. So you can imagine going from the seat back to here, 7 inches. It lost us, being 6 feet tall and more with Dad, it lost us a ton of room and made this truck super uncomfortable driving. I remember the first time we took the truck out, I was like, oh no, this thing is awful. You can't even ride in it. So we took that seat back out, and this is actually just a piece of aluminum, pretty heavy gauge aluminum, that we had the guys at B&H Sheet Metal cut out for us. We made the curves, and it's actually Zoots fastened in to the top up here. Actually, apparently it's not Zoots right now, but it's Zoots fastened to the top right here, and then that gained us so much room and completely changed how this truck sat. And, you know, there's other custom work, like these grade 8 bolts that hold the door panels in, and these custom-made armrests that we built, again, out of necessity, because we wanted some armrests for Power Tour, but we didn't have the stock ones, so we just made our own. Another kind of quirky but interesting thing about this truck is we actually retained the stock battery location, so it's actually still here mounted under the floor. We did pretty good with it. It mounted up. We've got the battery cables run out here. These battery cables came from Battery Cables USA. We actually measured them and got them to build them and everything. Since then, we've got crimpers to do it ourselves. But anyway, that's where this battery sits. And again, just one of those things that's kind of stock about this truck, that we left stock about. Another thing about the interior that we have, our cowl vent here is fully functional, and by cowl vent I mean our air conditioning system. This thing's a lifesaver going down the road. You don't really need AC as long as you're moving, but if you get stuck in traffic, it's a little different story. And that's that handle right there. The steering column in the truck is an I Did It column. So if you were paying close attention when we were talking about the gauges here, you notice that our steering column here isn't centered on these gauges like it would have been stock. There's a couple of reasons for that. First off, let's go outside under the hood and I'll show you. So you can see here is where the original steering column would have come through. But he moved it down, first down and toward the left-hand side of the truck, to simplify the steering linkage. So we wanted to clear these hooker manifolds that we used on this, and so we run that through here. So when he moved it over, it got it to where there was only 2 Borgeson joints, and then that ran us into the rag and pinion steering on this. So 2 Borgeson joints, and it simplified it a whole lot. If it had come out here, he would have had to basically have a joint that come over here and then back down that way, and it kind of got our angles all screwed up. So he did it that way. And then the other thing it did, inside, because we moved the steering column down, it tilted the steering column up, which gave us, being big guys in kind of a small truck, gave us a lot more leg room here with our steering wheel. Then after that, he basically used this, he built this piece right here to hang the steering column and got that bolted up into its original positions, but moved it down and to the left like we have it here. And then this is just a store-bought piece that he used from I Did It to get it mounted down there on the floor itself. This is the brake pedal It is the factory clutch pedal that was in this truck that he has taken and applied it into the brake position that he was able to use it. This pedal we're still not super happy with. It really needs to be cut off and shortened back. You can see, if you get down here, kind of what a major gap there is between the brake pedal and the throttle pedal itself. Dad left foot brakes all the time in everything he uses, so it's not as big a deal for him. But if I'm just driving down the road, I traditionally just use my right foot and go back and forth. So when you're doing that, it makes for a big difference. Let's get into the brake system now, since we're already there.
I guess everybody that fools with these builds and tries to put a truck together, if you could go back, you'd do some things a little bit different. The brake system on this thing is one of the things I would do different. I'd put hanging pedals on the firewall if I had it to do over. Actually, I moved the brake system to the clutch pedal, because I think Jake told you a minute ago, we moved the steering column and everything to the left to gain as much room as we could in the truck. So at the same time, I moved the brake. I hooked the brake master cylinder up, which I mounted under the floor. It's not stock. It's a dual reservoir brake system that's got the correct reservoir and master cylinder to use on these four-wheel disc brakes. But anyway, I moved that stuff over, and it got on my mind as to try to make that stuff look kind of factory, which means nothing. But anyway, we ended up with the brake pedal. The stock clutch pedal is now the brake pedal, which moved it to the left, which got your feet a little bit further apart. And it was also after we moved the steering column down, it kind of got in the same area as your feet with the brake pedal. And so anyway, we ended up doing that. And I spent more time than I should have. If I could go back and do this truck again, I would put hanging pedals in it. They just make it a little bit neater job. If you look, you can look on the firewall here. I put a remote master cylinder reservoir here, so you didn't have to get under the truck or go through a hole in the floor to add the brake fluid to it. I've done this on several vehicles. We've done this on several vehicles, and that works pretty well. But it worked out okay. It works okay. There's to see all the stuff that I did to make this work. You just have to take the cab off of it, and because it ended up being pretty complicated, and like I say, I spent way too much time on it. But that's what we ended up doing on these brakes, and they stopped the truck, so I guess that's okay.
I'm going to come back here and get a far away from this truck and show you some of the body lines. So it's not super true because the truck's sitting kind of down back here, but we wanted the running board, the bed, and the cab to all be running basically straight with each other. Not level, but running at the same angle downward, all of that. So we spent a ton of time in here. What we ended up having to do was we actually spaced the bed itself up. If you ever look at some of these trucks, you'll notice that the bed sits down like this, and the cab kind of sets straight, but the bed sets kind of running downhill to the front of the truck. And it's one of those things that just drives Dad crazy. So we put some blocks under the front and under this under the next section back of the bed of the cross seals there to get this raised up and got that angle good. But when we did that right here, this gap opened up a ton, and we lowered the back of these running boards to match that angle. So that made this gap right here appear. So if you look in here, there is about an 1.5 to 2 inch spacer that did not come in these trucks that we built and added in here. So it added a body line, but it filled the gap there, and it got our running boards, the bed, and the cab all running flat together. And those pieces of aluminum are under the bed and got it spaced up. And another one of those things, just one of the little details that probably nobody else would have noticed, but we did, and we took a lot of time to kind of make that work like that. One thing that you'll notice about this truck is it has an NC truck tag on it. Now, our good friend Fred Whitaker redoes these tags. He repaints them, he finishes them, he does a lot of really neat work for these tags like this. He's kind of an expert on the subject. we had found a really trick North Carolina farm truck tag to put on this truck, and we had him to fix it, and then we went and added the hand lettering on the side that has the Freeman Hot Rod Repair, which if you guys haven't checked out our top 5 tools video, in that video, I kind of give you the history of Freeman Hot Rod Repair itself, the shop that we started, the shop here in the business here that Dad worked for all those years after being laid off from Microswitch in Mars Hill. So feel free to check that out and know that history and know where that name came from. But we had that put on it, and Dad said, we can't put a farm truck tag on this. And I said, what are you talking about? You can't put a farm truck tag on. He's like, no, the hand lettering, that's a shop truck. It's just a truck. It's not a farm truck anymore. So we had to seek out this North Carolina truck tag, 55 truck tag to put on it, which we did. Also got Fred to fix it and got it put on there. But it's just a little glimpse into how Dad's brain works on stuff, because I would have thought a farm truck tag was on it, would have been fine. But after he said it, I was like, you know, you're right. It's not really a farm truck anymore. It's a shop truck. It needs just a truck tag. But our good friend that was a sign painter for a lot of years did the hand lettering on this. We just gave it to him, told him what we wanted, told him what it was going on, and he came up with this design of this Freeman Hot Rod Repair. And it's just awesome. This is all hand lettered. As we get in here pretty close, you can see the brush strokes, you can see all that. And watching him do this was just basically a highlight of this whole deal, because we got to the end and he added this in, got our Marshall, North Carolina on it. All the colors, it just fit. It just went with this truck, and it completely changed the look of it. Now the paint on this truck, to be honest, it's kind of crap. It's chipped and it's screwed up. It's not great, but this just kind of completed it. When we put that on it, it made all of the rest of the paint just work for whatever reason. So just one of those cool things and one of the cool stories that go along with this truck. So these are a set of salt flat wheels, salt flat style American racing wheels that we put on this truck. I didn't even, when we first got them, Dad bought them off of one of his friends, Brian Ramsey. I wasn't so sold on them, but then when we bolted them on the truck, I was like, oh man, like that's gonna look really great. And so it's got a more narrow tire on the front of it. It's got a 215 55 17 on the front, and then on the back we actually put a 265 60 17 on the back. This is just a Goodyear tire that we actually had here. And so when we first bolted this thing up, we were pretty sure what was gonna happen. We bolted it up deadlock solid. So what do you do like a month before Power Tour when everything is just now getting together on your truck? Well, you tear it down, you break it down, and you cut out the bed and you put a set of mini tubs in it. So that's what we did. Dad had this set of mini tubs from another project that had kind of went bust at one point, and so he had them sitting here. So we cut the bed, we got everything out here, and got this set of mini tubs, and he gave us just the right amount of clearance on this. And this tire just fills up that wheel well so well. It was a lot thicker back tire, gave it a little bit more meat on the back here, and really kind of changed what this truck would have looked like, I think, if it had had such a skinny tire on the back of it as it does on the front. I think that it would have hurt this truck a lot, to be honest with you. One thing that we've also noticed that was that the engine itself would not run hot, but our intake air temperatures were crazy. And the original intake on this thing came down here, kind of wedged out here, and we had a big cone filter that set right here. Well, you can imagine this is a very thin steel hood. These exhaust manifolds are right here. The radiator's right here. This thing was an oven. We had our filter setting here in one giant oven. So after doing some looking at our intake air temps on our EFI Live, we decided to build a cold air system for this. Now this system runs through here, down through the inner fender, out the front here, and the filter itself is mounted right there. So you can see that big old cone filter is mounted there. When we did this, that video did not get the views that I wish that it had. So if you guys are interested in seeing that, go check it out. I'll link it here for you to kind of see the process, because I got a few comments on the people that did watch it, and they're like, oh man, that's going to be like drinking air through a straw, blah, 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 blah. You're going to mess up the engine. It's not going to get the airflow that you want. That thing is getting direct ambient air basically ram air into that filter. It goes through the pipe fine. We actually increased our mass airflow by putting that in that location and getting that airflow on it. That has worked wonders and really made a huge difference in how this truck ran. It runs so much better, and it was noticeable. And basically now what spawned it, what made us do that, was we were seeing air intakes 160, 180, 190. We were seeing these really high air intake temps. And then we hooked up our computer to our stock Tahoe or Suburban 1, took it down the road, and realized that that truck was getting basically within a few degrees of ambient air temperature on going down the road. And we're like, oh man, we are way off. Like we're really way off. Now this truck does that too. We're within a few degrees of air intake temperatures of ambient all the time now. So that is something that we're really proud of, and I hope you check that video out. We laugh all the time and say that if we could put a personalized tag on this truck, it would be called leaker, because we had so many issues. I don't know if it was the thrash to try and get it ready for power tour or what it was. We had a lot of different things go on. We had leaks at the power steering pump. We had so many brake lines that had leaks in it that we had to fix. The only thing we didn't have was coolant leak. We didn't have a single coolant leak with those auto plug fittings or anything else, but we had everything leaking. And the biggest one that we had during power tour that we had no idea about was on the fuel tank. This thing was leaking like crazy. We would fill the truck up, go take it for a drive, pull out of the parking lot, and it would basically just slosh fuel all over the ground. So we thought that it was the vent that we had mounted up on the frame as high as we could get it, but we thought, man, this thing's pressurizing and it's pushing fuel out the vent, all this different stuff. So while we were on power tour, we actually went to a parts store, got some hose, extended it out, and put it out here on the side of the standard here, and basically zip tied it right here just to try and get it higher, much higher than the tank. Well, that didn't fix it. We still had a leak issue. I mean, like pouring fuel, it was crazy. So we got home, dropped the tank. There was a fitting, like a 1/4 inch, there was like a 1/4 inch plug fitting that we had left out, again, just kind of in the thrash of it. So we're like, that's it, put the fitting in, drove it again, pouring fuel again. So we pulled the fuel pump out of the tank, which is built into the tank on this truck. The cork gasket that was there just eat away. I don't know if it was because it set for so long or what it was. That was destroyed. So we had to put a new one of those on it. Then drive it, it's still leaking. I mean, literally, it leaks on and on and on. So then at that point, we did realize that after we had moved the vent down, that it was actually leaking out of the vent. So we moved it back up into the standard hole, and you'll see that here. We actually mounted it inside the standard hole, so it's way higher than the tank, and everything now is good on this. But that was one of our biggest issues, was a giant fuel leak for the entire power tour and then some afterwards. But we spent a lot of time getting that perfected and getting that, even though we had to drop the tank like 5 or 6 times. Now, if you guys have followed the channel for a while, you know that we're big fans of Dana 60s. We think they're a really great rear end, but because of a few different things, believes that a 9-inch is better. And in general, parts wise and things like that, most of the time it is a little better. And so that was what the biggest thing when this customer came to us, when Jeff came to Dad and said he wanted to do this, he wanted it to be really serviceable, wanted to be able to run this really well. So the rear end in this truck is a Ford 9-inch. It is actually a Ford housing that Jeff brought to us. Dad put strange axles in it. It has a Ford 350 gear in it. And that unit has, I mean, it's basically works super well, of course, as it would. Last year, my buddy over at WAF, you guys have heard me talk about Chris and WAF Racing in multiple different instances, but he reached out and was wanting to set up kind of a drag race thing between him and us and Colin over at the Daily Misfire, which of course I was all about and wanted to do, and we realized, well, the only thing we can really do it with is this truck. So it went from street rod, whatever you want to call it, to now we're trying to get this thing ready to go to the drag strip. And so we put a Yukon locker in it. We put a set of Lakewood slapper bars on this thing that I painted black. And what else did we do? That was when we started working on the intake and things like that to get those air intakes down. So there's like a series of videos there that we're trying to get it ready to go to the drag strip. That didn't happen last year We're really hoping that something like that's going to happen, and that's where I'll say here is we are going to do our best to get into that Six Smokies event here later this year. It's going to be in October. I'll let you guys know at the end of March if we got in whenever the registration opens, but we're hoping to take this thing on that Six Smokies event, and I think it's going to be a really cool deal. It's like a 1,200-mile trip kind of in the South, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina kind of area. We think that this truck's going to be really cool to do, but we've got to get it to the drag strip. So hopefully the next time you see this thing, it will be going down a drag strip, because I've never got to go down the drag strip, and I think that this truck is probably what it'll end up being the first time that I do it. So that's it. That's the full build breakdown on this first Series 55 Chevrolet truck that started the Shift Points YouTube channel. We are really proud of this truck. We love it. There's a lot of things that we've got to, there's actually a few things we found today that we need to kind of make some improvements on before we get it ready to take it to the drag strip for the first time, because like I said, I think this is probably be the first thing that I go down in on the drag strip. We're gonna have to change the seat. We don't like this seat. We like the back fine, but the seat bottom is super thick and springy, and it's super uncomfortable. So we're looking into some different options on a seat just to make it better. We've also talked about maybe just putting one main hoop in this truck, since we are planning to take it on that Six Smokies event, mainly so that we have some shoulder harnesses. We could put a shoulder harness bar in it potentially, and hopefully if we do that, we could do it in a way that you wouldn't even really notice it. But if we had one hoop and one bar there, so we can put some shoulder harnesses on it. So because we just have lap belts right now, those came from Retro Manufacturing, have worked super well. But we'd like a little bit more with us going down the drag strip. So potentially this year you're going to see it. Well, you're definitely going to see it some more this year as we work on it and potentially take it to the drag strip. But there might be a relatively big project go on with it, but we'll just have to see what that turns into. I hope you guys enjoy this. I hope that you like this truck as much as we do, because like I said, you're going to see it more, and if it wasn't for this truck, there might not have been a Shift Points YouTube channel. It was just sitting there staring me down whenever I had this idea to start the channel, and decided that this would be the perfect truck to start on, and that Power Tour event was the perfect way to get us motivated to do it, and it worked out really well. And now we're a year and a half after that, and we're still going, still making videos every week. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you looked forward to seeing some more. Hit that subscribe button, because we're going to do a similar video for Dad's Fairlane, for my Galaxy when it's back together. Different stuff that we've worked on over the years. We're going to try and break this down so that we have more documentation on what all we've done, and you guys have it in one place so that you can catch up on it. And hopefully you'll go back and check out some of these old videos that we did over 2 years ago now, and kind of get caught up. Video quality and the sound quality is not as good as it is today, but they're still pretty good videos, so I hope you check those out. Hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next week.